The espresso machine screamed like it was being murdered, and Jordan still hadn't looked up from her laptop. Rain lashed the floor-to-ceiling windows of Perk and Pixel, turning the Seattle skyline into a watercolor smear of gray and steel. My knuckles were white around the damp rag I was using to wipe down the counter, the rough terry cloth scraping against skin already raw from the morning rush. The sharp, acrid bite of over-extracted espresso hung in the air, mixing with the damp wool smell of patrons shedding raincoats. My throat felt thick, like I'd swallowed a fistful of gravel, and my heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the double shot I'd accidentally pulled for myself 20 minutes ago. It was the mug. The stupid, chipped World's Okayest Barista mug Jordan always used. It sat abandoned on the counter in front of her, half full of cold, dark roast, a single fingerprint smudged on the handle. She'd left it there yesterday too. And the day before. It felt like a tiny, persistent anchor dragging me back to this spot. This impossible longing, every single time she walked in. "Jordan," I said, my voice tighter than I intended, the words catching on the humidity that always clung to the city in late September. "Your mug, again." She finally glanced up, her eyes, that impossible shade of hazel that shifted from mossy green to deep amber depending on the light, flicking to the mug, then back to her screen. Her dark, unruly curls were pulled back in a messy bun, escaping strands framing a face usually set in intense concentration. Today there was a faint furrow between her brows, the kind that meant she was wrestling with a particularly nasty bug in her code. The scent of her lavender hand cream, subtle but clean, cut through the coffee fumes. "Huh? Oh. Yeah. Sorry, Riley. Just stuck." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, a rapid, staccato tap-tap-tap that was the soundtrack to my unrequited affection. She didn't even register the slight tremor in my voice, the way my palms had gone slick against the counter. To her, I was Riley the barista, reliable, efficient, part of the furniture like the slightly sticky high-top tables or the perpetually humming fridge. Not Riley, the person who noticed the way her nose scrunched when she was frustrated, or how she always tapped her index finger twice on the counter when she ordered her usual, a single espresso, no sugar, just the bitter truth. "It's fine," I managed, forcing a casual shrug that felt like lifting a boulder. I reached for the mug, my fingers brushing the cool ceramic. The chip on the rim, the one shaped vaguely like the Space Needle, snagged slightly on my thumb. A familiar, almost painful jolt shot up my arm. This mug had been a gag gift from my ex, Jamie, years ago, after a disastrous attempt at making sourdough that resulted in a brick. I'd kept it, ironically at first, then because it was sturdy, then because Jordan started using it. It became her mug. Every time I washed it, the chip felt like a tiny scar on my own heart. Just leaving it out clogs the dish pit. The lie tasted sour. I wanted it left out. I wanted the tangible proof she'd been here, the ghost of her fingerprints on the handle. She finally looked at me properly, her gaze sharp, analytical, the way she'd dissect a line of faulty code. The overhead fluorescent lights glinted off her glasses. "You okay? You seem tense." Her voice was neutral, concerned in the same way she might ask if the Wi-Fi was down. Professional. Detached. The rain drummed harder on the roof, a steady percussion that matched the frantic thudding in my chest. I could smell the damp earthiness rising from the potted fern near the door, mingling with the nutty aroma of the Ethiopian pour, overbrewing behind me. "Fine," I rasped, turning to dump the cold coffee into the sink, the dark liquid swirling away. "Just busy. You know how it gets." I focused on the rhythmic scrape of the rag, the gritty feel of coffee grounds under my nails, anything to avoid looking back at her. The truth was a hot coal in my gut. I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. rereading her GitHub profile, not for the brilliant open-source contributions, though those were impressive, but for the obscure, almost poetic commit messages. Fix the leaky abstraction, patch the wound in the logic, that felt like secret messages only I could decipher. Pathetic. Big pitch tomorrow for the new app, she added, turning back to her screen, the conversation over as far as she was concerned. Gotta get this module stable. The tap-tap resumed, a sound that usually soothed me, now grating like nails on a chalkboard. Her focus was absolute, a force field I could never penetrate. I felt invisible, transparent as the rain-streaked window. My cheeks burned, a flush creeping up my neck despite the shop's chill. I wanted to scream, to grab her shoulders, to say, "Look at me!" Just once. Really look. Instead, I picked up the chipped mug, the ceramic cool and familiar in my hand, and carried it to the back, the weight of it heavier than any stack of dirty dishes. The lingering scent of her lavender hand cream followed me, a cruel reminder of proximity without connection. As I plunged the mug into the scalding water of the 3-compartment sink, the steam stung my eyes. The chip felt like a jagged edge against my palm. Stupid mug. Stupid, impossible hope. Outside, the Space Needle pierced the low clouds, a cold, distant monument. Inside, the espresso machine hissed, the rain fell, and Jordan typed, oblivious to the silent earthquake shattering my world, over a chipped ceramic cup. The bell above the door jingled as new customers entered, bringing a gust of wet, pine-scented air. Time to reset. Time to be the Okayest Barista. Time to bury the ache deep where it belonged. But the ghost of her fingerprint on the mug handle seemed to pulse against my skin, a silent, persistent accusation of everything I couldn't say. 2 years ago, the rain was different. Less insistent, more of a gentle Seattle drizzle that smelled like wet cedar and possibility. Perk and Pixel was barely 6 months old, the smell of fresh paint and new espresso beans still clinging to the air, mixed with the hopeful buzz of fledgling tech startups colonizing South Lake Union. I was still finding my feet, the transition from Marine Corps medic to barista, jarring but necessary, the quiet rhythm of the shop, the predictable chaos of orders, a balm for the jagged edges of my PTSD. My hands still sometimes shook during the pre-dawn quiet, the phantom scent of antiseptic and gunpowder cutting through the aroma of roasting coffee. The world's Okayest Barista mug sat on the shelf behind the counter, a dusty joke, a relic from a life before the uniform, before the desert, before the quiet understanding that home was a shifting concept. Then she walked in. Not with a splash, but with the quiet certainty of someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere. Jordan. Her hair was shorter then, a practical crop, and she wore a faded band t-shirt under a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with freckles and faint, intricate geometric tattoos that looked like circuit diagrams. She carried a battered laptop bag slung over one shoulder, the kind held together with duct tape and sheer will. She ordered the espresso, no sugar, her voice low and precise, each word carefully enunciated. When I handed it over, our fingers didn't touch. But her eyes met mine, those hazel eyes, wide and startlingly direct behind new, thick-rimmed glasses. Not flirtatious, not dismissive. Just observant. Like she was scanning for errors. "Thanks," she said, her gaze flicking from my name tag, Riley, to the mug on the shelf. "World's Okayest Barista, huh? Ambitious." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, gone almost before it registered. It wasn't teasing, it was analytical. She saw the mug, processed the irony, filed it away. "Survivor's humor," I'd mumbled, suddenly hyper-aware of the scar above my eyebrow, the one that pulled slightly when I smiled. The shop was quiet, just the low hum of the grinder and the patter of rain on the roof. The scent of damp wool from her flannel mixed with the rich chocolatey notes of the Colombian beans we were using that week. My palms were sweating inside the thin cotton gloves I sometimes wore to dampen the sensory overload of handling hot metal and scalding liquid. She took a slow sip of the espresso, closing her eyes for a second. Perfect extraction, bright acidity, clean finish, not bitter. She opened her eyes, looking genuinely surprised. Most places overpull it. It was the first time anyone had commented on the quality, not just the caffeine hit. A flicker of something... recognition? Sparked in her gaze. You calibrated the grinder recently? Yeah, I stammered, caught off guard. Changed the burrs this morning. My Marine training kicked in. Observe, assess, respond. But this wasn't a combat zone. It was a coffee shop, and her focus was unnerving. You know coffee. I know code, she corrected, setting her cup down precisely on a napkin. Code needs precision. So does coffee. Same principles. She tapped the counter twice with her index finger, the first time I noticed the habit. My name's Jordan. I'm setting up shop next door. Nexus Dynamics. She gestured vaguely towards the new glass building going up. We build accessibility tools for neurodiverse users. The words came out in a measured stream. Factual, no embellishment. Need reliable caffeine to debug. That was the beginning. She became a fixture. Always the single espresso, no sugar. Always the precise double tap. Always buried in her laptop, fingers flying. I learned her rhythms. She arrived at 8:15 a.m. sharp, stayed until noon, then disappeared, often returning around 3 p.m. for another espresso and another intense coding session that could last until closing. I learned she was autistic, something she mentioned matter-of-factly one slow afternoon when I asked about the geometric tattoos. Sensory mapping, she'd explained, tracing a faint line on her forearm. Helps me regulate, like a visual anchor. It explained the intense focus, the occasional flatness in her tone, the way she sometimes seemed to retreat into her own precise world. It also explained why my clumsy attempts at small talk, commenting on the weather, asking about her project, often met with polite but impenetrable silence. She operated on logic, not social niceties. My heart foolishly didn't care. I started noticing everything. The way she'd push her glasses up her nose when concentrating, the faint scent of lavender hand cream that replaced the initial damp wool, the rare fleeting smile that transformed her face when she finally solved a problem. I began timing my breaks to coincide with her arrivals, arranging the pastry case just so she'd have a clear view, memorizing the exact temperature her espresso needed to be perfect. The chipped mug appeared one rainy Tuesday. I'd accidentally given her a clean mug, a plain white one. She'd taken a sip, frowned almost imperceptibly, and set it down. This one, she'd said, pointing to the dusty world's Okayest Barista mug on the shelf. It's calibrated. She'd picked it up, examined the chip and added, imperfections add character, like good code. She'd used it ever since. It became hers. I'd wash it meticulously, dry it with extra care, place it prominently on the counter just before she arrived. Holding that mug felt like holding a tiny piece of her attention, a fragile thread of connection. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the quiet intensity of watching her, the way the afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her hazel eyes as she stared at her screen, I'd blurted out, "You ever get out of the city? Hike or something?" She'd looked up, startled, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The sensory input is overwhelming. Too much unstructured data. I prefer controlled environments, like here. She gestured around the shop. Predictable variables. My face burned. Stupid Riley. Stupid. I'd retreated to the back, the smell of burnt milk from a failed latte attempt stinging my nostrils, the chipped mug suddenly feeling like a mocking trophy of my own social ineptitude. The rain outside had turned cold, hammering the roof like disapproval. That mug, once a silly joke, became my silent confessional. Every time I handled it, I poured my unspoken words into its ceramic walls. I see you. I see the brilliance, the struggle, the quiet courage. I wish you'd see me. But Jordan saw only code, coffee, and the precise double tap on the counter. The world outside the shop, the Space Needle, the fairies on the Sound, the vibrant chaos of Pike Place, might as well have been on another planet. My love was a one-way street paved with espresso grounds and silent longing, measured in the chipped rim of a mug that meant everything and nothing to her. The double tap. It was the sound that haunted me now. Weeks after the disastrous attempt to bridge the gap, I'd misread everything. Misread the way she always chose the same stool, the way she'd sometimes glance up when I walked past her section, the way she kept using the chipped mug. I'd mistaken professional appreciation for something more. The memory of my clumsy confession, "You ever think maybe we could grab coffee? Like, not here, somewhere, quieter," still made my stomach clench. Her reaction hadn't been anger, not even annoyance. It was worse. A flicker of genuine confusion, like I'd presented her with a syntax error in a language she didn't recognize. She'd pushed her glasses up her nose, the gesture slow, deliberate. "Coffee? We have coffee. Here, it's optimal." The flatness in her voice, the utter lack of subtext, was a physical blow. "I don't do social coffee. It introduces too many variables. Unpredictable." She'd paused, searching for the right words, her analytical mind grappling with an illogical social request. "You're a good barista, Riley. Very efficient. But this isn't a variable I can optimize for." She'd closed her laptop, the soft click final as a tomb. "I'll be working from the office more." She'd left the chipped mug on the counter full, untouched. It sat there for 3 days, a monument to my humiliation, before I finally washed it, the hot water scalding my already raw hands. Now, the silence between us was a tangible thing, thicker than the fog rolling in off Elliott Bay. She'd kept her word, working from the office. When she did come in, it was different. The usual focused intensity was replaced by a careful avoidance. She'd order her espresso to go, rarely making eye contact, the double tap replaced by a quick, almost furtive placement of payment on the counter. The shop felt colder, the cheerful indie folk playing over the speakers suddenly grating. The scent of coffee, usually my comfort, now carried the bitter aftertaste of rejection. My PTSD, usually manageable within the shop's predictable rhythms, flared with the tension. The clatter of cups sounded like distant gunfire. The hiss of the steam wound like radio static cutting through silence. I'd find myself gripping the edge of the counter, knuckles white, breathing shallowly, until the moment passed. The chip mug sat on the highest shelf now, out of the way, a painful relic. Every time I saw it, the phantom sensation of her fingerprint on the handle burned against my skin. Then, yesterday, the storm hit. Not just rain, but a proper Pacific Northwest gale. Wind howling around the building like a banshee. Rain driven sideways, streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. The power flickered, plunging the shop into near darkness for a terrifying 10 seconds before the backup generator kicked in with a low thrum. In the sudden quiet after the light stabilized, the bell above the door jingled. Jordan stood there, soaked. Rainwater streamed from her curls, plastering her flannel shirt to her frame. She clutched her laptop bag protectively against her chest, her face pale, eyes wide with a rare, unguarded panic. The usual controlled environment was gone, shattered by the storm. She didn't tap the counter. She just stood there, shivering, water pooling at her boots. "Jordan?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended, the professional mask slipping. The smell of wet earth and ozone filled the air around her. "The office, power's out, network down." Her voice was tight, strained. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, her breathing slightly rapid. My sensory regulation. The storm. The unpredictability. She trailed off, swallowing hard. It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her. The logical fortress was breached. "Come on," I said, grabbing a clean towel from under the counter. Not asking, just moving. "Back here. It's quieter." I led her through the service door into the small, cluttered stockroom, the smell of burlap sacks of beans and cardboard boxes momentarily overwhelming. It was dim, lit only by a single bare bulb, the sounds of the storm muffled by the thick walls. "Sit." I gestured to an upturned crate. She sank onto it, wrapping the towel tightly around her shoulders, her eyes closed, taking slow, deliberate breaths. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the industrial dishwasher in the corner, usually background noise, seemed to anchor her. I didn't speak. I just stood nearby, a silent presence in the controlled chaos of the stockroom, the scent of roasted coffee beans a familiar grounding note. After a few minutes, her breathing evened out. She opened her eyes, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not gratitude exactly, but a dawning recognition, perhaps, of a different kind of variable. "You know," she said quietly, her voice still a little shaky, "about the regulation." It wasn't a question. "I pay attention," I said simply, leaning against a stack of syrup boxes. The cool, smooth surface of the chipped mug, sitting on a nearby shelf, caught my eye. Sometimes the quiet variables matter most. She followed my gaze, her eyes lingering on the mug. A flicker of something, memory, regret, crossed her face. I shouldn't have left it like that," she murmured almost to herself. "The mug. Or the other thing. I wasn't calibrated for that request." She paused, choosing her words with the same care she used for code. "My parameters for social interaction, they're limited. Very specific. I value efficiency, predictability. You provided that. The coffee, it was always perfect." She looked directly at me then, her hazel eyes holding mine. I didn't mean to discard the variable. Just misclassify it. She reached out, not towards me but towards the mug on the shelf. Her fingers brushed the chipped rim. "Imperfections add character," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, echoing her words from 2 years ago. The rain lashed the building, but in the small stockroom, with the hum of the dishwasher and the scent of coffee surrounding us, the world felt suddenly, terrifyingly intimate. The space between us crackled with unspoken things, the old longing warring with the fresh scar of rejection, the chipped mug, a silent witness to the fragile, uncertain bridge she was tentatively trying to build. My heart hammered, not with panic this time, but with a fragile, dangerous hope. The storm raged outside, but inside, for the first time, the silence felt like possibility, not just absence. 3 months later, the city wore a brittle layer of autumn gold, leaves crunching underfoot on the walk from my Capitol Hill apartment to Perk and Pixel. The air held the crisp, clean scent of decaying maple leaves and the distant promise of wood smoke, a stark contrast to the perpetual damp of September. Jordan was back. Not every day, but regularly. The careful avoidance had thawed into a cautious, almost professional cordiality. She'd sit at her stool, order her espresso, the double tap a reassuring constant. We spoke in short functional bursts, weather, the new Ethiopian blend, the progress of the accessibility app her team was building. It was safe. Predictable. The chipped mug lived on the counter again, a silent peace offering. My heart still did its nervous little dance when she walked in, but I'd learned to cage it, to channel the energy into perfecting her espresso pull, into noticing the subtle shifts in her mood, the slight tension in her shoulders meaning a tough debugging session, the rare, almost smile indicating a breakthrough. It was enough. Or it had been, until last night. I'd stayed late, closing up alone. The shop was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic drip-drip of the sink faucet I kept meaning to fix. Scrolling through my phone while wiping down tables, I'd absent-mindedly clicked on a link Jamie had sent, some obscure tech blog Jamie thought I'd find interesting, given my new barista life. It was titled Debugging the Human Condition, Haikus from the Edge of Logic. Curious, I clicked. The author was anonymous, username syntax, Sarah444. The first haiku stopped me cold. Rain on window glass, logic fails. Variables shift, warmth where none should be. My breath hitched. Rain on window glass. The storm. The stockroom. The towel. The warmth she'd felt, unexpected, amidst the sensory chaos. It had to be her. I scrolled frantically. Chipped ceramic curve. Imperfections hold the truth. Efficient heart beats slow. The mug. The chipped rim. Efficient heart beats slow. My hand trembled. I read them all, 10 haikus, each a tiny, precise window into moments I thought were invisible. The double tap. The perfect espresso temperature. The way I'd stand silently in the stockroom. The quiet understanding when her focus slipped. They weren't love poems. They were technical observations filtered through a unique autistic lens, but the subtext screamed louder than any declaration. You see me. You see the variables I don't control. You are the anomaly I can't optimize away. The last one, dated yesterday, made my vision blur. Unpredictable code. This variable defies fix, wish I spoke your tongue. She didn't know how to navigate this. She was as lost as I was, just in a different language. The haikus weren't meant for me to find. They were her way of processing, of debugging her own unexpected emotions, using the only language she truly mastered. The realization hit me like a physical wave, a dizzying mix of exhilaration, profound sadness, and a crushing weight of understanding. She did feel it. But the chasm between how she experienced the world and how I needed connection felt wider than ever. How do you tell someone whose brain processes emotion through logic and code that you love them? How do you bridge a gap defined by different operating systems? Now, standing behind the counter, the Morning Rush building, I watched her walk in. The autumn light caught the gold in her hazel eyes as she took her stool. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes, but she managed a small tentative nod. Espresso, please. The double tap. My hands moved automatically. Grind, tamp, lock, pull. The ritual grounding me. The rich, nutty aroma filled the space between us. As I placed the tiny cup before her, the chipped mug sat empty beside it. Our fingers didn't touch, but the air crackled. You look tired, I said, the words out before I could stop them. Too personal. Breaking the safe protocol. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes for that second of pure sensory focus. Long night, debugging, interpersonal protocols. She opened her eyes, meeting mine directly. There was no confusion this time, no flatness. Just a quiet intensity, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. Found an unexpected variable, hard to isolate. Her voice was low, meant only for me. The haiku. She knew I knew. Or she suspected. My throat tightened. The scent of her lavender hand cream, usually so calming, now felt like a challenge. Some variables, I said carefully, my voice barely above the shop's hum, defy easy isolation. Might need a different debugging environment, less predictable. I gestured vaguely towards the window, where the golden leaves swirled in the crisp air. Maybe outside the controlled parameters. She set her cup down precisely. looked at the chipped mug, then back at me. A slow, deep breath. The sensory input, it's unstructured, unpredictable. A pause. The tap-tap-tap of her fingers on the counter was absent. Instead, her hand rested lightly on the chipped rim of the mug. But the output might be worth the risk. She didn't smile, but the tension around her eyes softened, just a fraction. Wish I spoke your tongue better. The echo of the haiku hung between us, raw and real. The bell jingled, customers entered, the safe bubble popped. But the shift was seismic. The chipped mug, no longer just a symbol of longing or a relic of missteps, had become the conduit. It held the weight of her vulnerability, the terrifying, beautiful risk she was acknowledging. As I turned to take the next order, the phantom sensation of her fingers on the mug's chip burned against my skin, not with the old ache of rejection, but with the fragile, terrifying heat of a connection finally, painstakingly, being established. The autumn sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time, the unpredictability didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the only possible path forward. The Space Needle looked different from the observation deck. Not a distant monument through rain-streaked glass, but a vast, intricate lattice of steel rising beneath our feet. The city of Seattle sprawled out like a living circuit board below. The wind whipped strands of hair across my face, carrying the crisp, clean scent of the Puget Sound and the faint metallic tang of the structure itself. It was Jordan's idea. Controlled exposure, she'd called it, her voice steady but her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. Gradual parameter adjustment, starting with elevated structured environment. Minimal sensory overload. We'd chosen a weekday morning, off-peak, the deck nearly empty. The only sounds were the wind, the distant hum of the city, and the steady, rhythmic thump of my own heart against my ribs. The chipped mug sat in my backpack, a silent talisman. She hadn't used it today. She'd brought her own travel thermos, but its presence felt significant. We'd been here 20 minutes, not talking much, just standing side by side looking out. The silence wasn't the old, awkward silence of misclassification. It was the quiet of two people carefully navigating uncharted territory, each aware of the other's presence, the shared space charged with unspoken words. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hand on the railing, but also a stubborn determination. She'd done this for me, stepped far outside her controlled environment. The gesture was louder than any declaration. "See that?" she said suddenly, pointing towards the horizon where the Olympic mountains emerged from a bank of clouds, their snow-capped peaks glowing in the late afternoon sun. Her voice was low, focused. The way the light refracts through the ice crystals? It's not just pretty. It's a specific atmospheric condition. Ice halos, caused by hexagonal ice prisms and cirrus clouds. She paused, glancing at me. I looked it up. Because it reminded me of the way the light hit the rain on the window that day. In the stockroom. She didn't look away. The variables changed. The output was unexpected. But the data point is valid. Nation, miss. My breath caught. It was her language. Her way of saying, I remember. I felt it too. The wind tugged at my flannel shirt. The cold metal of the railing biting into my palms. The vastness of the city below. The openness of the sky. It usually triggered my own anxieties. The feeling of being exposed, vulnerable. But standing here with her, her quiet presence a steady anchor, the panic stayed at bay. It was replaced by a profound, aching tenderness. She was mapping the world for me, translating her inner landscape through physics and light. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice thick. The data point. I turned to face her fully. The wind caught her curls, framing her face. Her hazel eyes held mine, no longer analytical, but open, searching. "You know," I continued, choosing my words as carefully as she chose hers. Sometimes the most important variables, they're the messy ones, the ones that don't fit the model, the ones that make the whole system more interesting. I reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. My fingers brushed the back of her hand where it rested on the railing. Her skin was cool from the wind, but I felt the slight jump of her pulse beneath my touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers shifted, tentatively, until they were resting lightly against mine. Not an embrace, but a connection. A circuit closed. The city spread out below us, the glittering expanse of Elliott Bay, the geometric grid of downtown, the patchwork quilt of neighborhoods stretching towards the distant Cascades. The familiar smells of damp concrete and distant traffic drifted up. But all I could feel was the fragile warmth of her skin against mine, the quiet intensity of her gaze. The chipped mug in my pack felt like a promise, not a relic. It had carried the weight of my silent longing, her initial misclassification, the terrifying vulnerability of the storm, the coded poetry of her haikus, and now, this fragile, hard-won connection. "I don't need you to speak my tongue perfectly, Jordan," I whispered, the wind snatching the words. I want to learn yours. Together. Debug the messy parts." My thumb traced a slow circle over her knuckles, a silent echo of the double tap, one variable at a time. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, transforming it. It wasn't the fleeting smile of a coding victory. It was deeper, warmer, reaching her eyes. The gold flecks seemed to glow in the afternoon light. "Incremental updates," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind, but the meaning was crystal clear. "With frequent backups." She squeezed my hand, just once, a firm, deliberate pressure. "And maybe occasional coffee. Not here. Somewhere, with a view of the hollows." We stood there, hands clasped, watching the light shift on the mountains, the city humming its endless song below. The future wasn't a clean, optimized path. It would be full of unstructured data, sensory overload, moments where our different operating systems would clash. There would be bugs, crashes, moments of terrifying uncertainty. The ghosts of past missteps, my clumsy confession, her retreat, lingered, but they weren't anchors anymore. They were just part of the code history, lessons learned. The chipped mug, safe in my pack, symbolized not just imperfection, but resilience. It had held cold coffee, hot tears, silent hopes, coded confessions, and now the fragile warmth of a handhold. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sound in fiery hues, I didn't feel the old familiar dread of the vastness. I felt a quiet, steady hope. It wasn't the blinding certainty of first love, nor the clean resolution of a solved equation. It was something more real, more earned, a bittersweet, hopeful uncertainty. The path ahead was uncharted, messy, and utterly unpredictable. And for the first time, standing on the edge of the city with her hand in mine, I realized that was exactly where I wanted to be. The wind carried the distant sound of a fairy horn, a low, mournful note that somehow felt like a beginning. We didn't need perfect syntax. We had this, right now. One imperfect, beautiful variable at a time.